This is Siddharth. Welcome to the 100x Entrepreneur Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Prime Venture Partners, an early stage VC fund led by Amit Somani, Shripati Acharya, and Sanjay Swami. Prime is often the first institutional investor in category creating tech startups in fintech, SaaS, healthcare, and education, such as MyGate, Quizzes, MFine. To know more about Prime, visit primevp.in. Today we will have with us Mark Kahn, founder of Omnivore. Mark, we love to listen to you on how Omnivore got founded and how it's a different venture capital firm than the other VCs.
Sure. It's an honor and a privilege to be on the podcast. I'm a big fan. Um, Omnivore has been around since 2011. Um, we are India's first agri-tech focused venture fund. Um, I guess the story behind Omnivore is it's kind of related to my story and the story of my co-founder, the other managing partner, Jinesh Shah. So I come from the agribusiness industry. I've worked in it my whole career. I don't come from a traditional VC or investing background. And in 2000, when I got out of grad school, I worked for Syngenta, one of the largest agri inputs companies in the world. In 2007, I moved to India to be the executive vice president for strategy and business development at Godrej Agrovet, the agribusiness arm of the Godrej Group. And I was at Agrovet from 2007 until 2013. While I was at Agrovet, I started getting interested in agri-tech startups in India. There were not many at the time, but I started seeing an interesting pipeline developing. This is in 2010. And so in 2011, I got together with Jinesh Shah. Jinesh was the CFO at Nexus Venture Partners. And we launched Omnivore as India's first agri-tech focused venture fund. Went out and raised money from LPs, raised a 260 crore fund across 2012 and 2013, and proceeded to invest that fund in 13 startups. Came back to raise our second fund in 2017 and raised a 675 crore fund across 2017 and 18. And so that's what we're investing out of now, and we've made 10 investments in that fund so far.
Great, Mark. And on the background of Omnivore, why do you think you could have done agriculture with some other verticals also? Why only agriculture? Like,
So to be clear, when we say that we're first of all, we like to use the term agri-tech because we're definitely not investing in farms or in sort of traditional enterprises. But when what we look at when we see agriculture in India is we see core agriculture, allied, the related financing, the risk management, the insurances, all of the food processing. And when you add that all up, it winds up being about 25% of the Indian economy. So we always like to say at Omnivore, we're investing in about 25% of the Indian economy, and we're investing in about 50% of the Indian population that lives on farm. So in practice, it is huge. I don't need to do agri plus something else because we're talking about, huge numbers of people and a massive part of what is India. And startups and new technologies and solutions for all of that. So we look farm to fork. We look at everything that surrounds agriculture, innovative food, and the rural economy. In practice, we have never struggled with deal flow or pipeline. We've always seen great entrepreneurs, and we've always been deluged with opportunities to look at. So very happy for our focus, actually. I think the other thing that's probably worth saying is I think generalist funds are wonderful. We co-invest with many generalist funds. I think as a sectoral fund, what we are able to build is subject matter expertise, serious subject matter expertise, and we're able to build, and we have built a team of people that come from this sector that are able to add disproportionate value to startups that we're working with. So, for example, one of our venture partners in Bangalore is S. Nagarajan. Naga used to run, Naga used to run Mother Dairy. So if you look at the Omnivore team, what we have curated, the people that we have pulled together here are all experts in agriculture, agribusiness, rural development, and consequently, I think we choose really great startups, and I think we're able to really help the startups that we work with to scale.
Can you elaborate more on the investments you have made, Mark, on all the companies, and what's your thesis on, let's say, a few of the companies?
Sure. So, one of our better known investments is Stellapps. That was an investment we made in 2013. It was a really strong team. Five senior folks at Wipro had come together and had decided to build the first dairy focused startup in India, a dairy technology focused startup. And their logic was very simple. Dairy is 4% of India's GDP, right? It's a huge part of the economy. India is the world's largest milk producer. There was very little technology adoption in the dairy industry. And so Stellapps went at the process of building an application layer across dairy using IoT. And it's been a great journey. The company now has billions of dollars of milk flowing through the network of digitized collection centers that they've built. They've been able to provide financial services and market linkages to those farmers. They're able to drive transparency and quality and food safety and traceability. That's just one portfolio company of ours, but it's emblematic of where we saw an incredible opportunity to deploy technology in a space that had never seen the application of technology before. And that's a lot of what we see in Agritech, is these startups are leveraging AI, leveraging machine learning, leveraging IoT, leveraging big data, leveraging synthetic biology, and applying them to parts of the agriculture and food value chain that have never seen them before.
The end customer in most of the agri-tech startups is the farmer or the consumer. In some cases, the distributors or the retailers as well. Am I right, Mark?
I mean, it really depends. You see many startups that we would characterize as agri-tech startups that are B2B, right? So a terrific example of that is one of our portfolio companies, Intello Labs. Intello Labs is building the world's largest fresh produce quality system. They're essentially using AI and ML to develop a digital quality standard in fruits and vegetables. Most of their customers are large retailers, or food processing companies, or food service companies. So Agritech is about farmers, but it's about much more than farmers. It's about the entire food system that we see all around us. You definitely have many startups that are focused on farmers. One of our better known ones is DeHaat. DeHaat has more than 3 lakh farmers on a platform in eastern India, in Bihar, UP, Jharkhand, and Odisha. And they are engaging with those farmers and helping them to access better inputs and sell at higher prices and secure lower cost finance, all coupled with farm advisory. But I think it varies. You see B2B, you see B2F, right? Business to business, you see business to farmer, you see B2B to F. Some startups that reach huge numbers of farmers, but do so by selling to other businesses that then in turn give them access to those farmers. So the business models vary dramatically.
So what has changed, in the lives of the farmers since Omnivore debuted in 2011?
So I think the farmers that have worked with our portfolio companies have been able to really transform the profitability of their farms. At Omnivore, we have a theory of change that governs what we invest in. We always look for one of three things in every startup that we invest in. They should be either improving farm profitability, which is very different from farm productivity or farm yield. We're always looking at the bottom line of the farmer as if they have an income statement for their farm. So you can improve their profitability by increasing the price that they sell at, by lowering their costs, by lowering their cost of finance, many different ways, by raising their yields. We look at startups that are increasing agricultural sustainability. And finally, we look at startups that are boosting the resilience of farmers. Whether it's stronger market linkages that take the risk out of farming, or insurance or fintech. We look across all of these spaces, and when we see what's happened to farmers that have engaged with our portfolio companies, we're able to see this improvement in profitability, resilience, and sustainability. A typical farmer that works with DeHaat, of the 3 lakh farmers they have on their network right now, they are buying their inputs substantially cheaper than if they were buying them from a local artia, from a local dealer. They are able to access low-cost finance that allows them to move away from a village moneylender, and they are selling their farm produce at higher prices than if they were selling in their local mandi. And all told, they're increasing the profitability of the farmers on the network anywhere from 50 to 100%. So that's a good example of an omnivore portfolio company that is driving that farmer profitability in a huge way. I can give you other examples, but that's a good one that helps clarify.
Do you also work with the Indian government? Because a lot of agriculture initiatives are taken by the government.
We do
Where
frequently work with the government. We certainly stay in close touch with them. We're involved in many. We've done work with Niti Aayog in the past. We're very active in FICCI and CII, which engages from a policy perspective with the government. We're in touch with many state governments. So yes, we do have to stay kind of closely in tune with what the government is doing in agriculture. But you also have to appreciate that the Indian government is not active in all aspects of agriculture. They are primarily active in grains, much more so than in horticulture. They are active in fertilizer and sugar. And then when you move away from that and you move towards, when you move towards horticulture, livestock, aquaculture, there are many spaces that I don't want to say they ignore, but they are much less actively engaged with.
a lot of big names are now investing in Agritech, including Tiger Global and Bloom. What is the thesis behind this shift?
I think I've seen this shift in a huge way in the last few years. We've done 2 deals with Bloom. We're doing a third right now. We've done deals with Sequoia, with Excel, with Mayfield, with Nexus, with Kalari. There definitely has been a shift. I have a theory about it, which is, there's the joke, and then there's the actual point. The joke is, I joke that Indian VCs have discovered Bharat. Right? They've rediscovered their own country over the last few years and recognized that there is more to startups than just serving the needs of the top 25% of urban Indians. I think more seriously, I think in 2015 and 16, there was a point of exhaustion that was reached in B2C startup investing. People had made multiple overlapping bets in restaurant platforms, food delivery, e-commerce. All of these spaces began to get a bit saturated. And if you see what happened at that time, all of a sudden you saw the birth of B2B focused SME startups, right? Players like Uran, uh, Jumbo Tail, and others of that ilk. And I think because of that pivot, forget about the pivot of startups, the pivot of VCs, not just looking at B2C, but also looking more seriously at B2B, and specifically B2B focused on SMEs, opened up the eyes of the venture community to the fact that, hey, guess what? About a quarter of the Indian economy is related to agriculture, right? Much more than just the stated number, which reflects primary agriculture. There's a huge amount of agribusiness that happens around that, and millions of entrepreneurs are part of that system. And I think VCs from that point onwards became quite interested in the opportunity in agri. I think for some it's taken longer than others. Excel has been by far the most active in the space, but I think other VCs began to catch on, and now I won't say that agri-tech is mainstream, but it's certainly something that almost every venture fund in India is trying to figure out, and is looking at deals coming from the sector.
So, from the outset, it looks very attractive to be in agri-tech. So, for most of our listeners, agri-tech seems to be most related to farmers. Can you describe, in your definition, what actually is agri-tech? Who are the various stake players in agri-tech?
Sure. So, we like to talk about. It's going to sound like the beginning of a long rant, but we talk about 9 core themes in that we see as defining agri-tech, and I'm going to kind of summarize them. So there are 4 of them that have seen the most amount of investment over the course of the last 5 years. And those are farmer platforms, B2B agri marketplaces, rural fintech, and farm to consumer brands. When we say farmer platforms, we're talking about things like DeHaat or AgroStar. When we're talking about B2B agri marketplaces, we're thinking of things like NinjaCart, Farmly, Clover. When we're talking about rural fintech, we mean things like Samunati or GramCover. And when we're talking about farm to consumer brands, it could be things that are more FMCG oriented, like Y-Cook, but also Licious and farm to home and fresh to home. So those are the biggest themes in agri-tech in terms of where funding has gone. And you can understand how those themes fit well into generalist VC theses, right? Farmer platforms are what they sound like. They're platforms. They access farmers directly, and they help them buy inputs, support their sale of outputs, provide advisory, provide finance. B2B agri marketplaces, right, are marketplaces just like any other, and that's a theme that generalist VCs have done in a major way in the last few years. Farm to consumer brands, obviously the farmer is producing, but ultimately they are consumer brands, right? Licious is a consumer brand, Fresh to Home is a consumer brand, Country Delight is a consumer brand, Y-Cook is a consumer brand. So all of those are more like consumer startups. They just have that strong agri backend. And rural fintech is fintech, probably the hottest theme of the last 2 years. So those are the 4 biggest themes that we've invested behind, that others have invested behind. Then there's a sort of a deep tech theme that cuts across agribusiness SaaS, that cuts across post-harvest technologies, that cuts across precision agriculture. And there you see investments like Tartan Sense. That was a deal that was done by Omnivore and Bloom and BeNext, and they're making very low cost farm robots to automatically harvest. To do automatic spraying for weed control in cotton. You see startups like Fussell that are on-farm sensors that help horticulture farmers manage their farms. You see platforms like Intello Labs and AgNext that are focused on post-harvest digital quality. Stellapps would fall into that bucket. So there's a big deep tech theme that cuts across a couple of different areas. And I think the final area is around biotech and innovative foods. And that's probably the least explored part of this ecosystem. It's the most nascent, but it's one that we hope to see a lot of pipeline coming from in the next few years.
So everybody talks about, the market size in agri-tech, which is, I believe, one of the largest, larger than e-commerce, as I've fathomed. But what are the challenges investing in agri-tech startups? What is the incubation period? You think, is it longer than a normal tech businesses or e-commerce businesses? And what are the challenges your portfolio companies face on ground, closely working with the various stakeholders?
So look, I think it depends whether you're a B2B oriented or a business to farmer oriented, B2F, as we like to say, oriented startup. So if you are B2F, if you are directly engaging with farmers, right, you have to overcome the challenge of the fact that, a lot of farmers are not very wealthy. Obviously, it's important to understand in agri-tech that farmers can be segmented just like any group of consumers, in the same way that most urban B2C startups didn't focus on the urban poor, right? They focused, initially on the top 10%, then the top 20%, then into the middle class, right? Agri-tech startups are usually focused on the top 20% of Indian farmers that own about half of the land in the country and are more progressive and have surplus income and can invest. But anytime you're doing direct to farmer engagement, right, you have to figure out how you're going to do that. Is it a purely digital engagement, or are you going to have an on-the-ground component? And most people have to have an on-the-ground component. So figuring out how to scale that in a cost-effective way is critically important. But it's also important to figure out how to leverage digital technologies to facilitate that onboarding and lower the cost of it. For B2B players, right, I would say it's much more like B2B in any ecosystem. If you're serving the food processors and food retailers and other players in the value chain, it's a bit more like what you would see in B2B across sectors. It's, I think, specifically around the issue of farmer engagement where agri-tech is different. And the models depend on the type of farmer that you're focused on. If you think about a company like Eruvaka in our portfolio, which focuses on aquaculture, right? They're focused on a farmer that is very high income. The aquaculture industry is 50,000 farmers producing $5 billion of shrimp exports. Those farmers, you can have direct interface with those farmers and still make money. When you look at a player like DeHaat, which is engaging with more average farmers in UP, Bihar, Odisha, and Jharkhand, right? They set up village level centers and have a person on the ground building out that center so the farmer can come to them and engage. But they're not, they're using that person to do their engagement. Doing a lot of direct sales from one central point isn't possible when you're dealing with so many farmers. So the challenge is really depending on the type of farmer that you wanna work with.
So one of the points is how is Omnivore helping its portfolio companies to grow and shape the future of agriculture in India? What's your help besides the chapter?
So look, as I've mentioned, we've built a team of real experts who all have background in agriculture, agribusiness, food processing, rural development. So when we, and examples of that are our venture partner S. Nagarajan, Naga as we call him, who used to run Mother Dairy. We have Rehem Roy, who's our partner in Chennai, who used to be with the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development. Abhilash Sethi, who joined us recently from Mahindra, where he helped set up their precision farming division. So the Omnivore team comes from this space. And so when we engage with Agritech startups, first of all, we understand them. We understand their challenges. We understand their business models in a way that generalist VCs take longer to kind of get up that curve. Generalist VCs can add a lot of value to Agritech startups. We think when we work together with them, collectively, we create much more value because we come with that subject matter expertise. We understand who they're sourcing from, who they're selling to, and we can help them tremendously with, improving their strategies, with a tremendous amount of business development, with linking with the right players in the ecosystem. Right. I think it's the same way that many generalist VCs have incredible linkages in the global digital ecosystem. That's what we bring in the global agri ecosystem, not just in India, though very strongly in India, but also to the largest agri companies in the world, the largest food processing companies in the world. And I would say probably, business development is the single largest value add that we bring to our portfolio.
So my wife has spent a few years living in a village, and she was born in the village. It's called Devkali near Shahjapur, and
Okay.
she has seen farmers suffering heavy losses. So while I was doing this podcast, she came up with her question to you: Is agri-tech farmers or are agri-tech startups basically will make like 300, 400% income difference in the lives of Indian farmers, or is just a 10, 20% additional increase in their next yield? Like, is
Look,
there a huge difference?
I think there is a huge
Can
difference. And we've seen that, as I mentioned in DeHaat, the average farmer is seeing a 50 to 100% increase in the net income of their farm. So I think that Indian agritech has the potential to be hugely transformative. The thing that we have to understand is just how terrible the status quo really is, right? Your average Indian farmer buys low quality inputs on credit. That credit comes at a very, very, very high cost from a village money lender. They sell into a regulated mandi where they are constantly ripped off by artiyas, banyas, traders, right? And they're essentially stuck in a perpetual loop of poverty. And I think, whether it's a startup like DeHaat that is trying to solve all three of those pieces, right, four if you count advisory, or startups that are just targeting the input side or the output side or the financing side, right? You really have the status quo is quite bad, and so you have the potential to really increase their incomes by 50% or more. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what the startups that we're investing in are trying to do.
so have you figured out any mass distribution channel for your startups?
So again, it depends on generalizing Indian farmers is like generalizing urban consumers in India, right? You have to build distribution channels, and some exist, right? There are some startups that are targeting traditional distribution channels, and some startups are building their own, right? We invested in Mitra, which has now been acquired by Mahindra, right? And they built their own distribution system for selling automatic precision sprayers for Indian horticulture. DeHaat, right, has their DeHaat centers, hundreds of them, across UP, Bihar, Odisha, and Jharkhand. There are dealers and distributors in the traditional trade, but they're not great at dealing with innovative products. So most agri-tech startups that are looking at doing direct farmer sales have to build a channel. And they probably want to build an innovative channel because the traditional channel struggles with innovative products.
But do you see uh, a startup like, which can become Amazon of tomorrow in terms of distribution for farmers that can help reach out to all the innovative solutions
Well,
can go through one channel?
I'm working on a deal that's going to do that right now. So it's a great question to ask me in a few months.
Great. So, coming towards the end of the podcast, today we are sitting in March 2020. The situation has completely changed what was looking 3 months ago. Everybody was making their goals and plans for 2020, including, every stage of the startups. With tough times like COVID-19, when startups in tier one cities are finding ways to cope up, how is agriculture, the backbone of the country, riding through these tough times? And what are the agri-tech startups still are able to serve them?
So what I would say is that agriculture is on a slightly stronger footing than many other spaces. It's certainly been a difficult week. Food supplies have been disrupted. Um, the police have been especially overzealous about maintaining the curfew. To be clear, I think they just are doing what they thought they were supposed to do. I think the good news is sitting here later in this week. Permits are now being given to allow food distribution, food processing to continue unimpeded, and I think agri and food as a space, um, while being disrupted and struggling like everyone is in these times of COVID-19, is on a slightly stronger footing. I don't know if you've noticed, but pretty much everyone has had to go food shopping this week, right? And one of the only things that you can go out and do and still shop for is food. Farmers are going to continue to farm, consumers are going to continue to eat, and agriculture is going to continue marching on because it has to, or everyone starves. So as a result, I think agri-tech startups over the course of the next year are relatively well positioned, versus many other sectors, to continue growing, to finding solutions to ensure that agri value chains continue despite all of the adversities, and to helping people get through this very difficult time.
Great. So now, Mark, you have worked with numerous startups in the last 10 years. If I were to ask you the qualities that differentiate the top two, three, I'll not ask their names because all your portfolio companies are like your children, but the qualities which you have analyzed and realized over the course of time that differentiates the top two, three entrepreneurs in your portfolio or those even outside your portfolio, from the rest of them, because everybody is working with a good intention to add value in the ecosystem to their customers. But what is really special about the top two, three people who you have worked with?
Look, I mean, I would say the most critical, the most critical trait that a great startup leader needs is resilience. Um, and I think that is a trait that is underappreciated in society in general. We always like people who are clever, and we love people who speak well and are charismatic. But resilience is something that we undervalue. I think the best startup CEOs that I've seen are the ones that are the most resilient, the ones that don't crack, the ones that can endure the difficult periods. And I think what's interesting is we are now in a resilience test. Um, you know, as a result of COVID-19, funding is becoming more scarce. Um, Business models are being tossed up into the air. And now we're going to see the difference between resilient and non-resilient CEOs and startup teams. And I think, we've been big believers in resilience for some time. It's one of the qualities we pay the most attention to when we invest in a startup. And we think it's going to make all the difference in the coming year.
So don't you think the person with the vision or a grandeur makes the one who can attract the most amount of funding and thereby gain a large chunk of attention of the VCs and thereby
I
have a
th-
capital
I
advantage.
I think in general that approach works very well for the hottest and sexiest sectors. Agritech has never been that. So it's never been, it's never been the sector that people wanted to toss huge amounts of money to. A famous boxer once said that everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face. Um, I think vision is important. I think charisma is important. I think resilience is more important.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your experience and the theses you have worked with and built during the last 10 years to take Indian agriculture and the startups working in the field to a new level.
It's a pleasure, Siddharth. Thank you for having me here.